We are catching up on the state budget deal, which was passed over the weekend. We've gotten some reaction from our local assembly members, Butler, Brindisi, and Miller today. And now we're joined by Senator Joe Griffo.
Yeah,
sounds like a law firm.
Not just over the weekend, like hours ago, really.
Yeah, just hours ago, yes.
You were telling us you were in rather late. Did you even get any sleep last night?
A few hours, couple hours.
What time did you get back in town?
I think I got in around 2, then got to bed, and then got up to make some calls and be here.
Well, thank you for coming in. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Obviously a difficult budget process. This was a start and stop and restart and then force it through at the end. Walk us through the last week, if you could, how it started and stopped.
It's kind of like it's opening days of today's the home opener for the Yankees, and I said I want to quote the great late Yogi Berra, it's deja vu all over again.
Yeah.
We're back to those days where you encountered these kind of problems, and I've been there 10 years now. And the first couple of 4 years were really difficult years with budget. They had improved under the governor. And I think it's unfortunate that we found ourselves, even though it's only a week late and it means it's timely, I still think you have an obligation and responsibility to meet the deadline. It's like you couldn't go on the air at 6 a.m., right? You got to be on the air. So we have that obligation. We need to do that. So I think the problem, now I'll get into both things. What is the problem and then what happened during the last week? To me, the problem is the process that we encounter. I think we can get a budget done, but when you lump, and you've heard this from a number of the members, when you're lumping policy into the budget document, like raise the age, and
right.
You can always make a correlation that there's some direct fiscal impact of some type. Obviously, in that case, you're putting a mandate on counties to an extent, even though funding will follow that currently. But so you can always make that argument, but I really think those type of issues do not and should not be in a budget process. That they're contentious, and as a result of that, it complicates an already challenging process. Secondly, you vote on omnibus bills. So you don't have an opportunity to vote on, they call it the big ugly. So yesterday, everybody's voting on aid to education along with Uber and along with raise the age, all in one package. So I have constantly advocated for those type of reforms. You hear of all the other reforms, but I think budget reform is equally as important.
Sure.
Because that would have a meaningful impact on how we move forward. So
does that mean, I don't mean to cut you off, does that mean each individual issue would get an up or down vote?
Yeah, that's what I think would be better. You would have a lot of more votes, and sometimes that becomes burdensome with the time frame. But I think if you could categorize it better than what we do right now, when you lump everything that's not interrelated, at least if it was all fiscally related even,
right.
Like aid to education and higher education aid maybe in one bill would make some sense. But when you're putting ride sharing and raise the age and water quality, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense.
So my question, I guess, then becomes, how is that involved in the budget financially? Is there money going towards Uber? Is there money that's allocated for raise the age?
That's a great point. So on the Uber case, and I was actually fought against this, there's a surcharge on Uber. So now you can say you're actually raising revenue, 4%. Now, it's not uncommon across the country that type of surcharge has been put on ride-sharing services. I thought it should be nothing when we first started, and now this was the compromise. The governor wanted it up to 7%, which made it ridiculous.
It's like a tax.
It's a tax,
it's just
correct.
A tax,
yeah.
Correct. So that's why you can tie it that way. And then during the course of the last week, there were a lot of negotiations. I thought we were very close last weekend on budget weekend, but things fell apart again, mainly because of the controversial policy issues that were there and the differences of opinion politically and even geographically to a certain extent. So what happened is on Tuesday, we began to pass the budget. We finally came to a consensus, but this is kind of an interesting process where you always have somebody at the last minute when you're looking at the language saying, well, gee, that's not exactly what we agreed to. And then the sides again say, well, wait a minute, you did agree to that. So that's why that's why language becomes so important, and that's why you need that time. We don't need the time to print paper like we used to. And that would take a lot of time because you have to print the paper. Now you do everything electronically. So that helps in saving some time there. But what happened is you got to look at the language. So, and also I think you should have the waiting period. Normally we have an aging period of 3 days. But because you need to get a budget done and you're on the burden of that deadline, the governor uses a message of necessity. Now, I don't like that, but I understand it in a case where, you're up against a deadline.
Sure.
So basically what happened is on Tuesday night we're voting and all of a sudden we stopped getting bills. And the leader, we got together and said, well, what happened here? And then that contentious item like raise the age came in, and a few other items along with that. But that was the primary focus. And we stopped. So all Wednesday, negotiations continued. And that was the end of the legislative calendar on Wednesday. We were supposed to be there Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then off for 2 weeks for Passover, which begins tonight at sundown. And then Easter, Good Friday this weekend, and Easter. And Passover goes to next Tuesday. So we thought the leader actually rightly said, I'm not going to stay here. The calendar says we're leaving. So that night we left at midnight, I think at 10 o'clock that night. And we left on that night last Wednesday. I actually think that sent a strong message that, look, we're not going to sit around here and waste taxpayers' dollars. So as a result of that, the staff and the leader stayed in Albany, obviously. I think people woke up and as a result said, look, let's get this done. We're this close. Everybody kept saying, we're this close, so like between the index finger and the thumb. But in the end, what matters is getting something done. And finally, it's been done. Well,
because Friday, again, we had posed this question to Assemblyman Miller, but he, couldn't speak for the Senate. Friday, we had reported that you guys were done. You were going to wait till the break. Was it the governor that finally said, okay, come back, let's do this?
Well, I think, the governor has been involved. I think, to his credit, he was engaged daily in the negotiations and trying to be like a mediator. He acted as a mediator. I think that's the only problem, really, what I see is some of his focus was lost. The amount of time he put in and the investment of his time was still there and trying to make something happen, and in the end brokered this compromise between the Assembly, the Senate, and the executive in this case. So yeah, I think that helped. But last weekend, things still weren't moving. It all came together, I think, Saturday afternoon. I mean, look what they did to the Assembly. They kept those guys in all day Friday, through the night, Friday night, into Saturday morning with doing nothing. I mean, and they were actually in their offices. And, I mean, it's just absurd and outrageous, to be honest with you. People would not, in your business or in any business, would not understand that. Yet in government, federal and state level, many times they accept it as common practice. And I think that's what has to change relative to the process itself.
We're talking with State Senator Joe Griffo this morning, getting some reactions on the state budget, which was finalized just several hours ago. A late deal coming together over the weekend. I want to get your thoughts on raise the age, on Uber. Obviously, everyone thinks that the increase, $1.1 billion increase for public schools is a good thing. You don't object to that, do you?
No, absolutely. I mean, we still need to work on a foundation aid formula because there's still problems, and I have a number of districts in our area that are not receiving the percentage that they should, but there are a number of factors. So that's why the formula needs to be revisited. That should have been our focus, but we talk about it, but we never seem to get there. But that driving that type of money, it's over $26 billion in the budget. It's the largest single growth item and one of the largest items in the state budget. So I think that's a good sign there. And included in that will be aid to libraries, which obviously need that, as well as teacher centers, which is very important. So there are a number of things within that primary education budget that's important. On the higher education piece, one of the things we tried to guard against here is that the governor obviously had a lot of things he wanted to do, and we didn't agree with. One of the things we stopped is he had a number of taxes and fees that he was putting on. Some of them would have been involving you when you went to the DMV.
He always hides these. Not he, I should say the state. The governor has a penchant for hiding these with DMV increases.
Right. They were the executive proposals, so we were able to push some of them back. There was an extension of the millionaire's tax for 2 years, which allows him to fund some of the programs he felt he needed funding. And one of the biggest things was the executive overreach, we call it, and he's been doing a lot of that, trying to do this power grab. Already the governor has immense power in the budget and an upper hand over the legislature. That's as a result of the constitutional responsibility as well as recent court cases in Pataki versus Silver. So what happens in this case is he proposes even more, and he wanted to deal with the potential shortfalls in Washington. And first of all, in the federal government, they've only had a budget 4 times in the last 40 years. So I know that we could and potentially will experience shortfalls, but these are right now only projections. So to try to take action now or to give him unilateral authority to act was wrong. So what we ended up agreeing to in the end is a situation where it would only apply to this fiscal year if there was a significant fiscal impact over $850 million hit as a result of federal policy. There would be two silos, one for Medicaid, one for other federal programs. So it would be limited only to federal impact and only during this fiscal year. What happens is the governor puts a plan together, proposes it. The legislature has 90 days to act so we could revise it, make our own. If there is no action in that 90 days, then he can take action through the division of budget to deal with the cuts. Now, the one thing I always say, too, when you look at a budget, we always talk about whether you should raise taxes or reduce spending. Well, you can also redirect funds. A lot of times you don't talk about that. And I think that's a matter of reprioritizing things. And I think that's something we need to keep in the back of our mind, too. So that happened relative to that. Shared services, I know you were talking about that earlier. I was listening to you as I was coming in. It's very convoluted. Look, I do believe that we have an obligation and responsibility to continually evaluate and examine how we're providing services and what can we do to improve those services and to reduce costs. I commend the county executive. He has tried to be visionary in that regard and saying, look, we need to take a look at these things. You get a lot of criticism, but I don't understand why anybody wouldn't be willing and ready to sit down and examine this, because can we do things better?
I agree.
I compliment people for sharing services already. I was a local official. I understand this. But so the concept of saying we need to look at this is and find better ways, I think, is laudable. I don't have a problem with that. The process the governor put together didn't make a lot of sense. I don't think you should penalize people. And he wanted to penalize people by withholding their aid to municipalities' money. And then he came up with this convoluted process of a referendum and everything. So as this ends, it's very difficult for me to explain it to you. But essentially, the county would convene the local governments. They would all come together to put together a plan. And that if there was a plan agreed to, then there would be no penalties, as I indicated. There would be no referendums, as the governor had originally wanted. But they would convene this panel, and they would talk about a plan. If a plan was put together, they would present it to the county board. The board would have to pass it by a majority. And then they would send it back to this panel. It would require several public hearings in this process. This panel consists of all the chief elected officers of the towns, the villages. I think school districts would also be invited. I don't know if that's required in the end. And so as a result of that, what happens is one of the last things I saw was there would have to be unanimity in accepting any plan. Now, that was changed, and the last variation of that now is that the communities it has to be a majority vote, not a unanimous vote. But you do have the veto power in the sense that you can take your community out of that plan. So say there was a plan involving Community A along with the rest of the alphabet, and Community A said, I don't like this, so I'm going to withdraw from this. So they have that option to do so.
Interesting. Okay. We got one more. We'll do one more minute, and then we'll take a break here. So the fact that the referendum's not in is actually probably, I'm surprised the governor was in favor of that, because it's another chance for the voter to say, no, I don't want this. And we've seen this locally where a referendum comes up and people vote it down. Right. So this actually probably makes it more likely that we would see more shared services and consolidation.
What type of shared services are we talking about? Police, fire?
It's up to the local government. So, but the problem is it's still too convoluted, this process, you know. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all unfolds.
Quickly, unfortunately, we're out of time, and I'm sorry. The raise the age. This took up so much of the conversation throughout this budget process. What was agreed to?
Well, essentially, we agreed to basically misdemeanors stay and go towards the family court system. The violent felonies go into the criminal justice system as proposed. There's a new type of description for the court called a youth court, but it isn't a criminal court. The DAs have some involvement, which we thought was important. Look, from our perspective, we were worried about victims and about public safety. And we recognize that there are other issues here. There will also be separation of housing, so they will not be housed in areas like prisons. Also, the last fight was over who should have supervision. Should it be the Office of Children and Family Services or the Department of Correctional Services? Now we leave that to an arbiter, a judge, to make the determination based upon the case.
So, and a felony, a serious crime. If you're 16,
violent felony
17...
would mean you go through the regular criminal justice process.
Okay,
right?
And that stays that way?
It stays that way. Now, I'm going to have to get into all the technical aspects here. I don't have my final sheet in front of me, but essentially, yes, violent felonies continue to go through the criminal process.
All right.
So the other thing at Uber, quickly, the opt-out you'd asked about, that was because a number of downstate people, they were still arguing over what type of regulation they wanted. So we thought it was best to begin and allow the opportunity, and then if a county feels they don't want it for whatever reason, then they can get out of it.
All right. State Senator Joe Griffo, on very little sleep. Thanks for breaking this down for us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we didn't even get into the free the college tuition, which is really an enhanced TAP program now, and there's a lot of variations into that too. Right now, a lot of students get to go to school free under $50,000, so this brings it up to $125,000, and it really covers an enhanced TAP from, say, SUNY tuition is $6,400, and it covers it up to $5,500. But then the colleges will have to make up some of the difference now, but they're also getting rational tuition increases over the next several years.
Does SUNY replace our community colleges? If it's free for $125,000,
the community colleges are part of the SUNY system. So I believe now you really be able to go to a community college without paying tuition based on this program.
All right, Senator Joe Griffo, nice job. Thank you so much.
Good seeing you.